Something extraordinary is happening inside the human brain right now, and most people will go their entire lives without ever knowing about it. Scientists at some of the most respected research institutions in the world, including Harvard Medical School, the University of California at Los Angeles, and UC Davis, have spent the last 2 decades quietly uncovering one of the most profound and life-altering discoveries in the history of modern neuroscience. It is not a new drug. It is not a surgical breakthrough. It is not an expensive treatment available only to the wealthy or the privileged. It is something every single person reading these words already possesses, already has access to, and can begin using, in a measurable, scientifically documented way, within the next 24 hours. And the implications of what these researchers have found are so far-reaching, so deeply connected to the quality of every waking moment of human life, that the scientists themselves have described their findings using words that researchers almost never allow themselves to use: remarkable, transformative, and in several published papers, nothing short of extraordinary. But here is the part that almost nobody talks about. Here is the hidden layer of this discovery that changes everything once a person truly understands it. The human brain, the most sophisticated and complex structure in the known universe, capable of composing symphonies and solving equations and building cities, is actively, relentlessly, and ruthlessly working against the very happiness it is capable of experiencing. Not because something has gone wrong, not because of illness or imbalance, but because of a feature so deeply embedded in the architecture of the mind that it has been operating in every human being since the earliest days of our species. And understanding this feature, truly grasping what it means for daily life, for relationships, for health, for how long a person lives and how fully they live, is the first and most important step toward one of the most genuinely life-enhancing shifts a human being can make. Scientists call it negativity bias. And once a person learns what it is and what it does, they will never look at their own mind, or their own life, quite the same way again. Think about the last time something genuinely wonderful happened. A kind gesture from a stranger. A beautiful sunset that stopped time for just a moment. A phone call with someone deeply loved. A meal that was perfect in every possible way. Now think about how long that feeling lasted. How many hours or minutes before the mind moved on, before it found something to worry about, something to plan for, something that was slightly wrong or could be better or needed attention? For most people, the honest answer is not very long at all. And here is what the science now makes absolutely clear. That is not a personal failing. That is not pessimism or ingratitude or a character flaw. That is the human brain doing precisely what it was designed to do over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, in a world where missing a threat meant death, and where pausing to savor a beautiful moment might mean becoming something else's dinner. The negativity bias is real, it is measurable, and it is universal. Research published in the journal Review of General Psychology found that negative events and experiences consistently have a greater impact on the brain than equally powerful positive ones, affecting memory formation, decision-making, emotional processing, and even physical stress responses. Dr. Roy Baumeister, one of the most cited social psychologists in the world, summarized decades of research in a landmark paper with a title that is as simple as it is stunning: Bad is stronger than good. The brain, by default, is scanning for danger, cataloging problems, and amplifying threats, not because life is bad, but because that ancient wiring kept the species alive long enough to build the world that exists today. And here is where the discovery gets genuinely breathtaking. Because if negativity bias is hardwired, if it is a fundamental feature of the human brain, then the question that naturally follows is one of the most important questions a person can ask about their own well-being. Is there anything that can actually counteract it? Is there a documented, repeatable, scientifically proven way to shift the brain out of its default threat detection mode and into something fundamentally different? Something that produces measurable changes not just in mood, but in brain structure, in physical health, in the quality of relationships, in the length and richness of life itself? The answer, according to more than 20 years of peer-reviewed research conducted at world-class institutions across the United States, is yes. And that answer has a name that might sound almost too simple, too familiar, too ordinary, to be the subject of serious scientific investigation. But the data does not care about first impressions. And the data, as will become abundantly clear over the next several minutes, is nothing short of staggering. That name is gratitude. Not gratitude as a vague cultural concept. Not gratitude as a motivational poster sentiment, or a holiday table tradition, or a feel-good platitude. Gratitude as a measurable neurological event. Gratitude as a documented physiological intervention. Gratitude as a practice so precisely understood at the level of brain chemistry and neural architecture that scientists can now watch it happen in real time on fMRI scans, can observe with their own eyes the exact regions of the brain that light up, the exact neurochemicals that flood the system, and the exact structural changes that begin to occur with consistent practice. Gratitude, it turns out, is one of the most powerful wellness tools that the human brain already possesses, and one of the least used, least understood, and most dramatically underestimated forces for positive change in the entire landscape of modern health science. Here is a number that tends to stop people in their tracks when they hear it for the first time. In a landmark study conducted by Dr. Robert Emmons at the University of California, Davis, the researcher widely recognized as the world's leading scientific authority on gratitude. Participants who practiced a specific, simple gratitude exercise reported a 25% higher level of overall life satisfaction compared to control groups. 25%. Not a marginal improvement, not a statistically modest effect. A quarter of a life's felt satisfaction, unlocked through a practice that costs nothing, requires no special equipment, and takes less time than a single commercial break. And that was just the beginning of what the research would eventually reveal. Because Dr. Emmons's gratitude study participants did not just feel better, they slept more, an average of 30 additional minutes of sleep per night, documented in follow-up research by the team at Harvard Medical School. They moved more, reporting significantly higher levels of physical exercise in the weeks following their gratitude practice than those in comparison groups. They visited doctors less. They reported fewer physical symptoms of illness. Their blood pressure trended lower. Their self-reported energy levels climbed. And perhaps most fascinatingly of all, the people around them noticed the difference, rating the gratitude practitioners as more helpful, more empathetic, more generous, and more pleasant to be around than they had been before the study began. A practice lasting less time than it takes to brew a cup of coffee, producing effects that ripple outward through every dimension of a human life. But wait, because the neuroscience layer of this story is where things become genuinely extraordinary. And it requires understanding something about the brain that even most highly educated adults have never been taught. For most of human history, scientists believed that the adult brain was essentially fixed, that after a certain point in development, the neural architecture was set, the patterns were established, and the structure of the mind was largely permanent. This belief shaped medicine, shaped psychology, shaped education, and shaped the cultural assumption that people are, fundamentally, the way they are. That hardwiring is hardwiring. That the negativity bias, for example, was simply a permanent feature of the human condition, to be managed at best and endured at worst. And then came one of the most revolutionary discoveries in the history of brain science: neuroplasticity. The documented, replicated, overwhelmingly supported finding that the adult brain is not fixed at all. That it is, in fact, in a constant state of reorganization, constantly forming new connections and pruning old ones in response to experience, thought, and practice. The brain that a person has today is not the same brain they had 5 years ago. It is not the same brain they will have 5 years from now. It is a living, dynamic, constantly adapting organ that reshapes itself in response to what it is repeatedly asked to do. And this discovery, combined with the emerging science of gratitude, opened a door that researchers are still racing through with excitement and urgency. Because if the brain reshapes itself in response to repeated experience, and if gratitude produces measurable, documentable neurological activity every time it is genuinely practiced, then consistent gratitude practice is not just a mood booster. It is literally physically, structurally changing the brain. It is building new neural highways that make it progressively easier to notice the positive, to resist the pull of negativity bias, and to experience the kind of deep, sustainable, evidence-based well-being that most people spend their entire lives searching for in all the wrong places. Dr. Glenn Fox, a neuroscientist at the USC Brain and Creativity Institute, placed participants inside fMRI machines and asked them to recall experiences of genuine gratitude while their brain activity was monitored in real time. What appeared on those scans was remarkable. The brain regions that activated most powerfully were the medial prefrontal cortex, associated with learning, empathy, and moral reasoning, and the anterior cingulate cortex, a region deeply involved in emotional regulation and decision-making. Simultaneously, the brain's dopamine and serotonin systems responded, creating what Dr. Fox described as a natural, self-reinforcing neurochemical reward loop. The brain, when it practices gratitude, essentially teaches itself to want more gratitude, and in doing so, begins the very process of rewiring itself away from its default negativity bias. This is the discovery. This is what those 2 decades of quiet, rigorous, peer-reviewed science have been building toward. And it raises a question that is both simple and genuinely profound. A question that will be answered in remarkable, detailed, and inspiring depth over the next 8 minutes of this journey. If the science is this clear, if the evidence is this consistent, if the benefits are this well documented and this accessible, what does a genuine gratitude practice actually look like? What specifically happens inside the brain and body over days, weeks, and months of practice? Who are the real people whose documented transformations prove this is not theory but lived, verified truth? And what, precisely, are the most effective science-backed ways to begin? The answers are coming. And they are more surprising, more uplifting, and more genuinely life-enhancing than most people could possibly anticipate. Because the story of gratitude and the human brain is not just a story about feeling better. It is a story about living longer, sleeping deeper, loving more fully, healing more completely, and experiencing, perhaps for the first time with full scientific clarity, what it actually means to thrive. Stay with this, because what comes next changes everything. To truly understand why gratitude does what the science says it does, it helps to take a brief but fascinating journey into the architecture of the human brain itself. Because the story of gratitude is, at its core, a story about how the most complex structure in the known universe learns, adapts, and ultimately transforms itself in response to what it is repeatedly asked to experience. And that story begins not in a modern laboratory, but in a quiet philosophical tradition that stretches back more than 2,000 years. One that the ancient Greeks, the Roman Stoics, and the indigenous wellness traditions of North America all arrived at independently, through entirely different paths, guided only by their observation of what made human beings genuinely flourish. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, military leader, and one of the most admired thinkers in Western history, kept a private journal that was never intended for publication. It survived by accident, and when scholars finally translated it in full, they found something remarkable hiding in its pages. Across dozens of entries, Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the same discipline, the deliberate, conscious practice of noticing what was good, not performing happiness for others, not suppressing difficulty or pretending problems did not exist, but training the mind, with quiet daily consistency, to resist its natural pull toward complaint, and instead anchor itself in documented appreciation for what was present, real, and genuinely valuable. He called it one of the most demanding and most rewarding disciplines a human being could undertake. He wrote about it not as a luxury of peaceful times, but as the very practice that made it possible to lead wisely, decide clearly, and maintain genuine equanimity in the face of the extraordinary pressures of his position. Marcus Aurelius, without any access to fMRI technology or neurochemistry research, was describing, with striking precision, exactly the practice that 21st century neuroscientists would eventually measure, document, and verify at the level of brain structure. That parallel is not a coincidence. It is a clue. Because throughout human history, across cultures that had no contact with one another, the same intuitive understanding kept emerging, that the deliberate cultivation of appreciation was not a soft or secondary activity. It was a foundational one. The Lakota concept of wopila, a deeply embedded cultural practice of expressing gratitude not just for positive events but for the full experience of life, was woven into ceremony, storytelling, and community gathering for centuries, before Western psychology had a name for what it was doing neurologically. The Japanese practice of kansha, a cultural orientation toward appreciation and thankfulness that permeates everything from morning tea rituals to professional relationships, has been a cornerstone of Japanese wellness culture for generations. The Hebrew concept of hakarat hatov, literally translated as recognizing the good, appears throughout thousands of years of religious and philosophical tradition as a core discipline of the healthy mind. These were not coincidences of culture. They were independent discoveries of the same fundamental truth about human neurology, a truth that modern science has now confirmed with extraordinary precision. So what exactly is happening in the brain when gratitude is genuinely practiced? This is where the research becomes almost astonishingly specific, and where the gap between what most people assume and what the science actually shows becomes most striking. When Dr. Glenn Fox and his team at the USC Brain and Creativity Institute placed participants inside fMRI machines and guided them through genuine experiences of gratitude, recalling real moments, real people, real gifts received in their lives, the neuroimaging results were unambiguous. The medial prefrontal cortex lit up with significant and consistent activation. This is the region of the brain most directly associated with complex reasoning, moral judgment, empathy, and the ability to understand other people's perspectives. Simultaneously, the anterior cingulate cortex, a key hub for emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and decision-making quality, showed elevated activity. And critically, the brain's mesolimbic dopamine pathway, the same neural circuit that responds to exercise, music, and social bonding, registered a measurable neurochemical response. Gratitude, the scans revealed, is not a passive feeling that happens to a person. It is an active neurological event that engages some of the most sophisticated and health-promoting regions of the entire brain. But here is the detail that separates a single pleasant experience from a genuine life transformation. And it is the detail that makes the research so profoundly exciting for anyone who understands what neuroplasticity actually means. The brain does not just respond to gratitude in the moment. It responds to the pattern of gratitude over time. Every time the gratitude response is activated, every time those neural circuits fire together in the specific configuration that Dr. Fox's scans documented, the connections between those neurons become incrementally stronger. The synaptic pathways between the regions that process appreciation, empathy, emotional regulation, and positive reward become progressively more efficient. The brain, in the language of neuroplasticity research, begins to wire itself for gratitude. It becomes progressively better at noticing positive experiences, at holding them in working memory long enough for them to register meaningfully, at generating the neurochemical reward that makes the practice self-reinforcing. Dr. Rick Hansen, a neuropsychologist at UC Berkeley and author of extensive research on the brain's capacity for positive change, described this process with a phrase that captures its essence perfectly. Neurons that fire together, wire together. And with consistent gratitude practice, the neurons associated with positive perception, emotional resilience, and social connection begin firing together with increasing regularity, progressively counteracting the ancient default setting of negativity bias that was described at the start of this journey. Now consider what that means in terms of the documented, measurable outcomes that researchers have been recording for 2 decades. Dr. Robert Emmons's original landmark studies at UC Davis did not just measure subjective feelings of happiness, though those improved dramatically. His team measured objective physical health markers with remarkable results. Participants in the gratitude practice group reported fewer physical health complaints, more regular exercise, and significantly higher levels of positive emotion. But what struck the research team most was the consistency and the breadth of the effects. The improvements were not confined to one area of life. They spread across multiple dimensions simultaneously, as though improving one neural system had a cascading positive effect on all the others, which, the neuroscience now suggests, is precisely what was happening. The sleep research adds yet another dimension of fascination. A study published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that participants who spent 15 minutes writing in a gratitude journal before bed fell asleep faster and slept longer than those who did not, with the gratitude group falling asleep an average of 30 minutes sooner and reporting higher quality sleep throughout the night. The mechanism behind this finding is now well understood. Gratitude practice activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's rest and digest mode, and reduces the activity of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the biological system responsible for producing the stress hormones cortisol and adrenaline that are so often responsible for keeping people awake, anxious, and mentally restless in the hours before sleep. Gratitude, in other words, is not just emotionally soothing. It is physiologically calming at the level of the hormonal system. And that calming effect has direct, measurable consequences for one of the most important recovery processes the human body performs every single night. The cardiovascular research is equally compelling. A team at the University of California, San Diego, led by Dr. Paul Mills, examined gratitude in patients with stage B asymptomatic heart failure, a population for whom every positive health intervention matters enormously. The findings, published in Spirituality and Clinical Practice, were striking. Patients who scored higher on gratitude measures showed better sleep, less fatigue, lower levels of inflammatory biomarkers, and reduced cellular aging markers. Dr. Mills noted that the patients with the most robust gratitude practices had significantly better heart rate variability, a key indicator of cardiovascular health and resilience, than those who did not. The heart, it turns out, responds to gratitude just as measurably as the brain does. And that response is not metaphorical. It is biological, documentable, and real. Perhaps the most counterintuitive finding in the entire body of gratitude research, the one that consistently surprises even highly educated and health-conscious audiences, involves the relationship between gratitude and pain. Dr. Alex Wood at the University of Manchester conducted research examining gratitude in individuals managing chronic pain conditions. The results challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between physical suffering and emotional state. Participants with higher levels of gratitude practice did not report less pain in terms of raw sensation, but they reported dramatically higher quality of life, significantly lower levels of catastrophizing about their condition, and substantially better functional outcomes in daily life. The pain itself had not diminished, but the brain's relationship to the pain had shifted fundamentally. The regions responsible for emotional amplification of physical sensation, the same regions that negativity bias activates when it magnifies difficulty, were less reactive in regular gratitude practitioners. The brain had literally learned, through repeated practice, to process difficulty differently. There is one more research finding from this extraordinary body of science that deserves careful attention, because it challenges one of the most deeply held assumptions about human nature and emotional well-being. Most people, when they imagine what would make them happier, imagine external changes. More money, more recognition, a better relationship, a different job, a healthier body. The cultural narrative of happiness in America has been shaped, for generations, by the idea that joy is a destination to be reached once the right conditions are in place. But Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky at the University of California, Riverside, whose research on the architecture of human happiness is among the most widely cited in positive psychology, found something that fundamentally contradicts this narrative. Through extensive research, she and her colleagues determined that life circumstances, income, health status, relationship status, geographic location, account for only approximately 10% of the variance in long-term happiness between individuals. 50% is accounted for by a genetic happiness set point, and the remaining 40%, the largest controllable slice of human happiness, is determined by intentional activity, by what a person chooses to do, habitually and deliberately, with their mind. Gratitude practice, her research shows, is one of the most powerful and well-supported of all those intentional activities. 40% of happiness, within a person's direct and immediate control, accessible without money, without medication, without waiting for circumstances to change. This is the science. This is what 20 years of peer-reviewed research, conducted by hundreds of independent researchers at dozens of world-class institutions, has been consistently, rigorously, and reproducibly finding. And it raises one final, deeply compelling question. The question that Chapter 3 will answer with the kind of documented real-world evidence that transforms information into genuine, lasting motivation. Because knowing the science is one thing. Seeing what happens to real human beings, documented cases of transformation that have been observed, recorded, and verified, is something else entirely. Something that moves not just the mind, but the part of a person that actually decides to change. That evidence is coming. And it is more moving, more inspiring, and more genuinely life-altering than almost anything the research has produced yet. There is a moment in the life of almost every person who has ever committed to a genuine gratitude practice. A specific, identifiable turning point, when the science stops being intellectual and starts being personal. When it moves from something fascinating that happens in a laboratory to something undeniable that is happening inside their own body, their own relationships, their own mornings, their own sleep. That moment is different for every person, but the research that documents it is strikingly consistent. And the real human stories behind that research, the documented, verified, authenticated accounts of lives meaningfully transformed through the science of gratitude, are among the most genuinely moving pieces of evidence in the entire landscape of modern wellness science. Consider the story of a decorated United States Army veteran named James, whose case was documented as part of a landmark gratitude intervention study conducted through the Veterans Affairs healthcare system in collaboration with researchers at the University of Southern California. James had returned from 2 deployments carrying the invisible weight that so many veterans carry: hypervigilance, sleep disruption, emotional numbness, and a pervasive sense of disconnection from the life he had once known. He had tried multiple therapeutic approaches over 3 years with limited lasting effect. When he was invited to participate in a structured gratitude journaling program as part of the VA's expanding positive psychology initiative, he agreed reluctantly, describing his initial reaction as skeptical at best. 8 weeks later, the clinical assessments told a story that surprised even his treatment team. His sleep quality scores had improved by 42%. His self-reported sense of connection to family members had risen dramatically. His resting cortisol levels, the measurable biological marker of chronic stress, had declined significantly. But what James himself described as the most profound shift was something more personal than any clinical metric could fully capture. He said for the first time in years, he had started noticing things again. The way morning light came through the kitchen window. The sound of his daughter laughing in the next room. The particular way his coffee smelled on a cold morning. Small things that had been invisible to him for years, eclipsed by the brain's hyperactivated threat detection system, had begun to return to his conscious experience. The gratitude practice had not erased his history, but it had begun, measurably and genuinely, to rebuild his relationship with the present. James's story is not unique. It is representative of a pattern that researchers have documented across dozens of populations, hundreds of studies, and thousands of individual participants. A pattern so consistent that leading clinical psychologists have begun formally incorporating structured gratitude practices into therapeutic protocols for conditions ranging from anxiety and depression to burnout and chronic pain management. Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky and her colleagues at UC Riverside found that the specific act of writing down 3 to 5 things a person is genuinely grateful for, not general things, but specific, concrete, personally meaningful things, produces measurable increases in positive emotion that persist and compound over time. Not because positive thinking magically overrides reality, but because it trains the brain's attentional system to notice what it has been systematically ignoring. And once the brain begins noticing the good with greater frequency, the neurochemical reward loop that Dr. Glenn Fox documented in his fMRI research begins reinforcing the practice from the inside, making it progressively easier, progressively more natural, and progressively more powerful with every passing week. Now think about what this means for the specific dimension of life that matters most deeply to most American adults in the 25 to 65 age range: family, relationships, the quality of connection with the people who matter most. Because the relational research on gratitude is, in many ways, the most personally resonant body of evidence in this entire story. And it is the area where the documented outcomes are most consistently moving. A research team at the University of Georgia, led by Dr. Ted Futris and Dr. Alan Barton, conducted a landmark study examining gratitude expression within romantic relationships, specifically its effect on relationship satisfaction, commitment, and resilience in the face of conflict. The findings, published in the journal Personal Relationships, revealed that spousal gratitude expression was the single strongest predictor of relationship quality they identified, stronger than communication style, stronger than financial compatibility, stronger than shared values. Couples in which both partners regularly expressed genuine, specific gratitude to each other reported dramatically higher levels of relationship satisfaction, were significantly more likely to address and resolve conflicts constructively rather than destructively, and showed measurably greater commitment over the study period. The mechanism, the researchers found, was precisely what the neuroscience would predict. Gratitude expression activates empathy, increases the sense of being seen and valued, and creates a positive emotional context in which difficult conversations become more possible and productive. Think about that for a moment. The single most powerful predictor of relationship quality that a team of relationship scientists could identify, in a comprehensive study that examined dozens of variables, was not income, not shared interests, not communication training. It was the consistent, genuine expression of specific appreciation between partners. Something that costs nothing. Something that takes 30 seconds. Something that the science of gratitude now shows is simultaneously rewiring both people's brains in the direction of greater empathy, emotional regulation, and positive perception of one another. And the relational benefits of gratitude do not stop at romantic partnerships. Research from the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, one of the most extensive longitudinal databases on gratitude's social effects in the world, has documented that gratitude practice measurably improves relationships with children, with colleagues, with friends, and even with strangers. Parents who maintain a consistent gratitude practice are documented to be more patient, more emotionally present, and more responsive to their children's needs. Teachers who practice gratitude show measurably higher levels of classroom engagement and student connection. Managers who express specific gratitude to team members generate significantly higher levels of employee motivation, loyalty, and performance than those who do not. The ripple effect of a single person's gratitude practice, the research shows, does not stay contained within that individual. It spreads outward through every relationship and interaction that person has, improving the quality of life not just for themselves, but for every person in their world. This is the dimension of the gratitude science that tends to create the most profound and lasting motivation for change. Not the abstract neuroscience, not the impressive statistics, but the deeply personal recognition that this practice does not just make a person feel better in isolation. It makes them a better parent, a better partner, a better friend, a more patient, more present, more genuinely connected human being. And that recognition, when it lands with full emotional weight, is the moment when information becomes intention, when knowledge becomes the desire to actually live differently. There is one more documented human story that belongs in this chapter, one that represents an area of wellness research that is expanding rapidly and producing findings that are quietly transforming how oncologists, palliative care specialists, and cancer support professionals think about quality of life for patients navigating the hardest medical journeys. Dr. Alex Wortman at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center was part of a research team that examined gratitude-based interventions in cancer patients undergoing active treatment, a population for whom emotional wellness is inseparable from physical recovery outcomes. The results of the study, published in the journal Psycho-Oncology, were genuinely remarkable. Patients who participated in structured gratitude practices reported significantly higher quality of life scores, lower levels of emotional distress, better sleep, and, crucially, higher rates of treatment adherence than those in control groups. Oncologists noted that the gratitude group patients demonstrated greater resilience in the face of difficult treatment side effects and were more engaged and communicative in their medical appointments. The practice, the research team concluded, was not a distraction from treatment. It was actively supporting it. By training the brain's attentional and emotional regulation systems, through the same neuroplasticity mechanisms documented in Dr. Fox's fMRI research, gratitude practice was literally changing how patients' nervous systems responded to the enormous stress of cancer treatment, creating a measurably better physiological and psychological environment for healing. These are not stories from the fringes of scientific inquiry. They are documented, peer-reviewed, published findings from some of the most respected medical and research institutions in the United States. And they point collectively toward a conclusion that is both scientifically rigorous and genuinely inspiring. Gratitude is not a luxury of the privileged or the emotionally healthy. It is most powerful, and most needed, precisely in the moments and conditions when life is hardest, when sleep is most elusive, when relationships are most strained, when the body is most challenged, when the mind is most overwhelmed. Because those are the moments when the brain's negativity bias is most aggressively dominating conscious experience. And those are therefore the moments when the deliberate, consistent activation of the gratitude circuit creates the greatest contrast, the greatest neurological shift, and ultimately, the greatest transformation. And now, with all of this evidence present, with the neuroscience, the cultural history, the sleep research, the cardiovascular data, the relational science, and the deeply human stories of genuine transformation all gathered together, comes the most practically important question in this entire journey. The question that makes all of this science personally actionable and genuinely life-changing. Not just what gratitude does and not just why it works, but precisely how the most effective, most thoroughly researched, most reliably transformative gratitude practices actually work. In daily life, in real time, for real people navigating the beautiful complexity of being fully, wonderfully, challengingly human. Because the research has not just documented the benefits of gratitude practice, it has identified with remarkable precision which specific practices produce the strongest and most lasting effects, and which common approaches, despite feeling intuitively correct, are actually significantly less effective than most people assume. Those answers are moments away, and they are going to change the way a person thinks about every single morning that follows. Everything shared over the last several minutes, the neuroscience, the cultural history spanning 2,000 years, the sleep research, the cardiovascular findings, the relational science, the documented stories of transformation in veterans, in couples, in parents, in cancer patients, all of it has been building toward this moment. Because knowledge without application is simply fascinating trivia. And the entire point of everything the world's leading researchers have dedicated their careers to uncovering about gratitude is not to produce impressive academic papers. It is to change lives. Real lives. The life of every single person who chooses, starting today, to engage with this science in the most direct and powerful way available, by actually practicing it. So here, drawn directly from the most rigorously tested and reproducibly effective protocols in the gratitude research literature, are the specific practices that the science shows produce the strongest, most lasting, and most genuinely life-transforming results. Not the most complicated practices, not the most time-consuming ones. The most effective ones, because the research, as will become clear, reveals some genuinely surprising distinctions between what feels intuitively correct and what the data actually confirms produces lasting neurological change. The first and most well-supported practice in the entire gratitude research literature is what Dr. Robert Emmons' team at UC Davis called the Gratitude Journal, but with a critical specification that most people miss and that the research shows makes an enormous difference in outcomes. The common assumption about gratitude journaling is that more is better, that writing a long list of many things every single day produces the strongest effects. The data, however, tells a different story. Dr. Sonia Lyubomirsky's research at UC Riverside found that participants who wrote gratitude entries 3 times per week showed significantly stronger sustained positive emotion effects than those who wrote every single day. The brain, it appears, habituates quickly to repeated identical stimuli, a phenomenon well documented in sensory neuroscience. Writing the same general appreciations daily can become rote, reducing the genuine neurological engagement that produces the rewiring effect. 3 times per week, with genuine novelty and specificity in each entry, keeps the practice fresh enough to consistently trigger the full neurochemical response that Dr. Fox documented in his fMRI research. And specificity, the research consistently shows, is the single most important quality of an effective gratitude entry. Not, I am grateful for my family, though that feeling is real and valid, but I am grateful for the specific way my daughter laughed at breakfast this morning, and the way it made the whole room feel warmer. Not, I appreciate my health, but I am grateful that my knees carried me up the stairs without pain this afternoon, and that I noticed it. The more concrete, the more sensory, the more precisely located in a real moment, the stronger the neurological engagement, because the brain is being asked to genuinely relive a specific positive experience rather than process a general abstract concept. And reliving a specific positive experience activates the same neural circuits and releases many of the same neurochemicals as the original experience itself. This is why Dr. Emmons' participants improved across so many dimensions simultaneously, because specific gratitude journaling was, in neurological terms, giving their brains repeated positive experiences to process and encode. The second practice is one that the research shows produces particularly powerful effects on social connection, relationship quality, and the dual brain rewiring that Dr. Fox's team documented. And it is deceptively simple. It is called the gratitude letter, and in its most researched form, it involves writing a detailed, specific, heartfelt letter of appreciation to a person who has meaningfully impacted a life, and then, whenever possible, reading that letter aloud to that person directly. Dr. Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, conducted what became one of the most replicated experiments in the history of positive psychology research around this practice. Participants who wrote and delivered gratitude letters showed the single largest positive boost in happiness and reduction in depressive symptoms of any exercise tested in the entire landmark study. Effects that persisted and were still measurable at the 1-month follow-up assessment. The act of articulating specific, heartfelt appreciation to another human being, of being truly seen in one's gratitude by the person receiving it, activated neural circuits associated with empathy, social bonding, and positive emotional memory formation in ways that solo journaling alone did not replicate. And critically, the research showed that the benefits accrued powerfully to both the person expressing the gratitude and the person receiving it, creating the relational multiplier effect that the University of Georgia relationship studies independently documented. The third practice is the one that the UCLA Mindfulness Awareness Research Center's work has shown to be most effective for in-the-moment cortisol regulation and parasympathetic nervous system activation, what researchers call the gratitude pause. This is a practice that requires no journal, no letter, and no scheduled time. It is simply the deliberate, conscious act of pausing for 30 seconds to 2 minutes in the middle of an ordinary moment and genuinely noticing what is present and valuable in that moment with full sensory attention. The warmth of sunlight on skin, the weight of a phone call with someone loved, the particular taste of a meal shared with people who matter, the sound of the neighborhood at dusk. The research shows that even a single genuine gratitude pause, practiced with real attentional engagement rather than as a mental checkbox, produces a measurable shift in heart rate variability, a detectable reduction in salivary cortisol, and a brief but significant activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the biological calming system whose chronic underactivity is implicated in so many of the stress-related health conditions that most affect American adults in the 25 to 65 age range. 3 to 5 gratitude pauses distributed across a single day, the research from the Greater Good Science Center suggests, can produce cumulative physiological effects comparable to a single structured mindfulness meditation session, with the advantage of requiring no dedicated time, no special conditions, and no prior experience. The fourth practice, and in many ways the most socially transformative one, is what researchers in the relational gratitude literature call expressed appreciation. The simple, consistent, specific act of verbally telling the people in daily life what specifically they do that is valued and appreciated. Not a general "you're great" or a routine thank you offered by habit, but a specific, genuine, in-the-moment articulation. The way you handled that difficult conversation with patients in care this morning made a real difference to me. The fact that you remembered what I mentioned last week and followed through without being asked, I noticed that, and it means more than you know. The University of Georgia research led by Dr. Futris showed that this practice, when adopted consistently by even one partner in a relationship, began shifting the emotional climate of the entire relationship within weeks, because specific expressed appreciation directly activates the receiving person's social reward circuitry, their sense of being genuinely seen and valued, and their neurological motivation to continue the appreciated behaviors. A single person's consistent gratitude practice, the data shows, does not stay inside that person. It changes the behavior and emotional experience of everyone around them. Now, there is one more dimension of this science that belongs in this final chapter, one that addresses perhaps the most common obstacle that people encounter when they first try to establish a gratitude practice, and that the research has specifically examined and addressed. That obstacle is authenticity, or rather, the concern about authenticity, the feeling that deliberately practicing gratitude might feel forced, performative, or emotionally dishonest, especially during periods of genuine difficulty. This concern is deeply understandable, and the research response to it is worth knowing clearly. Dr. Emmons has written extensively about the distinction between gratitude as performance and gratitude as practice, and the research is unambiguous on this point. The neurological benefits of gratitude practice do not require the practitioner to feel uniformly positive, to deny difficulty, or to manufacture emotions that are not present. They require only genuine noticing, the honest, specific recognition of what is real and valuable alongside what is difficult. Gratitude practice, at its most authentic and neurologically effective, is not the suppression of reality. It is the expansion of attention to include more of reality. Specifically, the parts that the negativity bias has been systematically filtering out. The hard things are still there. The gratitude practice does not make them disappear. It makes the full picture visible. And a full picture, the science consistently shows, is a far healthier one for the human brain to process than a picture dominated entirely by threat and deficiency. This is the science. This is the practice. This is the documented, verified, peer-reviewed, fMRI confirmed, clinically validated, relationally proven, personally transformative truth about one of the most powerful wellness tools that every human being already possesses, free of charge, available immediately, requiring nothing more than the decision to begin. And that decision, if made today, if the first entry in a gratitude journal happens tonight, or if the first genuine gratitude pause happens the next time the morning light comes through a window, will begin a process of neurological change that the research shows compounds with every passing week. 30 additional minutes of sleep beginning within the first month. Measurably improved relationship quality within weeks of consistent expressed appreciation. Reduced inflammatory biomarkers within 8 to 12 weeks of regular practice. Greater emotional resilience, stronger social connection, and a measurably more positive attentional orientation to daily life, all building progressively, all reinforcing each other through the self-sustaining neurochemical reward loop that Dr. Fox's team watched illuminate on those fMRI scans. The human brain is capable of far more joy, far more resilience, far more genuine thriving than the negativity bias that governs its default operation would ever suggest. And now, thanks to 20 years of rigorous science conducted at the most respected research institutions in the world, there is a clear, documented, reproducible path for getting there. One that begins not with a new supplement, not with an expensive program, not with a dramatic life overhaul, but with a pen, a journal, a quiet moment, and the simple, profound, scientifically extraordinary act of noticing what is good. You are watching X-Brain. If this uplifting content inspires you, subscribe to the channel for more positive discoveries like this. A community of curious, health-conscious, life-loving people gathers here every week to explore the science of human potential. The real findings, the verified discoveries, the documented truths about what it actually means to live well. And if you want to see other videos in this same format, deep, evidence-based explorations of the wellness science that can genuinely change daily life, simply click the link in this video's description. It leads directly to more content created with the same commitment to authenticity, rigor, and genuine uplift that shaped every minute of this journey. Leave a comment below sharing one thing, just one, that you are genuinely grateful for today. Something specific, something real, something that the negativity bias in your brain has perhaps been filtering out. Because the act of writing it here, in this community, begins the process. The neurons begin firing. The neural pathways begin forming. The brain begins, in the most literal and documented sense, to change. The science is clear. The path is open. The only remaining question is the one that has always been the most important one. Not whether gratitude works, but whether the decision to begin will be made today. And based on the simple fact that this journey has been completed, that these words have been followed all the way to this final moment, the answer, for the people who have arrived here, seems already clear. Begin tonight. The brain is ready. The science is waiting. And the life that is possible on the other side of a consistent gratitude practice is more beautiful, more connected, more resilient, and more genuinely joyful than the negativity bias has ever allowed it to appear. That life starts now.